Welcome to the 2023 DocLands Documentary Film Festival. My name is Michelle Svenson. I am one of the programmers of the festival, and I have the extreme privilege to work with such a wonderful programming team and supportive staff at the California Film Institute. Before we begin, I would like to offer acknowledgement of the tribes whose land we stand on today. The California Film Institute sits on the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary homelands of the Coast Miwok, the Pomo, and the Wapos peoples, which includes the Southern Pomo and Graton-Rachirian tribes. DocLands is proud to have, DocLands is proud to have an outstanding network of community partners. Tonight's community partner is the Redford Center, who for over 15 years have been championing environmental films. Without the support of our sponsors, donors, and members, we could not do this without you, so thank you. And for some housekeeping, I believe that everybody here should have received some red and white ballots. So don't forget, that's your chance to vote for your favorite film at the festival. After the screening, there will be volunteers outside of the theater that will collect them. Tonight's film is a beautiful lyrical journey through Appalachia. We have the director, Elaine Sheldon, with us here today. So before the film, she'll say a couple words, but she'll also do a Q&A after the film. But I also felt very personally touched by this film as the great-granddaughter of a coal miner whose family is from Pennsylvania. It's a very different place now, but I do remember all the time going home to Pittsburgh and asking Dad why all the trees were gray. And he said, "Oh, that's nothing. They were black when I was a kid." But recently I went back home to Pittsburgh and all the trees were green and I was shocked. I had never seen color there before. But it is also a very special place and it acknowledges, I would like to say her film gives you an opportunity to really celebrate and mourn coal and all of its flaws and also all of its beauty, the richness that it gave, in culture and community. So thank you for that. Elaine, come on up and say a couple words, but I do want to remind everybody to please turn off your phone ringers. Thanks.
Wow, this is so many people. Thank you guys. It's so beautiful out today. You could be doing so many things, but you're here. Such a pleasure to be here. This film has been a long time coming. I've been grappling with what coal means to my community for a long time. I am a coal miner's daughter. My brother still works in the mines. As of yesterday, put in his 2 weeks notice. So my family is evolving as this film documents. And so I just want to invite you to what I call in this film the kingdom. So welcome and thank you so much for being here, and look forward to talking to you afterwards.
Wow. So happy that we got to share this film with you. I'm going to ask Elaine to come up, and I'm going to read her bio here for you as well. Elaine McMillion Sheldon is an Academy Award-nominated and Emmy and Peabody winning documentary filmmaker. She is a recipient of the 2020 John Simon Guggenheim Fellowship in Film and a 2021 Creative Capital awardee. In 2016, she received a highly competitive National Breakthrough Award and fellowship from Chicken and Egg Pictures. Other honors include being named a 2021 Livingston Award finalist, 2018 USA Fellow by United States Artists, and one of the 25 new faces of independent film by Filmmaker magazine. Elaine, thank you so much for being here. A couple of things that, I will open up questions here to the audience, but I did want to start off with a couple myself. The decision to have the girl, when did you make that choice?
Well, what you guys saw today is nothing like what I embarked on. So I can't say exactly when I knew I wanted this to be partly through a kid's eyes. It mostly came from the fact that I learned it had to have some personal element, and I was reflecting a lot on remembering when sort of learning these rituals and things and how they were affecting me. And so the film actually just started with us, Molly Bourne and I, documenting these coal-related traditions like pageants and 5Ks. That's black cornstarch, by the way. That's not coal dust. And what was interesting about those was as we were documenting them, some of them were brand new. Some of them had just started in the last 10 years. Some of them have been going on for 50 years. And some of them were a response to the decline of coal and to give people a sense of community. Some of them were propping up the myth of coal. And so it was already pretty interesting that there was this line between reality and myth through those very performance-based scenes, right? You have a miner coming to the classroom and the kids have never seen coal before. They're like, what's that? And he's like, that's coal. And so it was very interesting to me. And from that first scene we filmed with the kids, I knew kids were a way into this. This is a highly politicized issue. We obviously all know what coal is and what it's done to the environment and where we should be going in the direction of it. And so kids allow us an entry into the story that's more about identity and culture and really asking the question of what's next for them. And so when we knew we wanted to find kids, we went to local dance studios because we wanted to find girls that were comfortable in front of the camera, that they could ignore us, but also that had some coal history in their family. So this wasn't a, abstract thing to them. But Gabby, so Lainey's the one with the red hair, and Gabby's her friend. And Gabby actually didn't know her family's coal history till we started this project. We were filming, and I was talking to her grandma, and she told me she grew up, and where she said she grew up was a coal camp. And I was like, was your dad a miner? She said, yeah. I was like, does Gabby know that her grandpa was a miner? Oh, I don't think so. And I was like, how has this never come up? And we have to take her there so that when you see her take her there, it's the first time Gabby's been learning about her grandma's history. So I think Gabby's done some Q&As with us and has traveled a little bit with us. And I think it's given her a whole new sense of what it means to be from that place. It's really interesting to see her develop too, because they're 13 now, so they look different, as you would imagine, and act different than they did back then.
In the film, you say that you learned to be quiet.
Yeah.
Well, obviously,
Clearly.
now you made this film. So what has the community's response been to it? Have they seen it yet? Have you taken it home, or have you traveled through Appalachia with the film yet?
Yeah, so we're going to start doing screenings in the region soon, but everybody that's in the film has mostly seen it. We did a private screening right after Sundance, and everyone in my family, that's my pawpaw, that's my grandpa who's in it, and he's seen it, and my dad's seen it, which was the scariest one. My brother's seen it. Lainey's dad, who still is a coal miner, saw it too. And I think what has been really moving to me is that Flip, who's Lainey's dad, he comes off as very emotionally cold about all this, right? This is a job, and there's no myth and mystery to this. There's nothing interesting. There's no story to tell here, right? That was sort of his reaction to this film when we were making it. But Lainey can be involved because I trust you. And when we showed him the film, I just asked him, I said, well, what did you think? Because he was sitting there silently, and he said, you told the truth, and he just started weeping. Because I think it was a moment for him to actually look at not just the contemporary thing that he's been a part of, but this historical impact and the weight of all that. And my dad sort of articulated the same thing, which is I actually wasn't aware of these emotions I was carrying with what it meant to do this work and what it meant to the land, to have such an impact on the land, what it meant to my family. But helping me process that was a grieving moment. So far, the miners that have seen it have been really responsive, and we really wanted the film to be model in some way a civil dialogue between conversations not necessarily being had, because there's no just transition that's happening right now. It's people are being left behind and being, as you guys know, sort of ostracized and politicized to take a side that is actually hurting them. So we're hoping that through our screenings in the fall, we can start bringing people around the table in the same way we do with the film.
Right. Anybody have any questions?
Yeah. Two nuggets, pun intended. I'm glad you brought up a little bit about the rednecks. That's how that term came around, I learned.
Totally.
That one person walked all those miles along the East Fork, the East Coast, and had the red bandana. So I thought that was really incredible. And then my grandfather was a miner in England.
Oh, yeah.
The mining is enormous, like it is in this region, all along England and Wales. So I remember spending intermittent childhoods and smelling a perpetual kind of thick fog that coal dust get the big pile outside your house, just dumped right on the road. I remember growing up with that.
That's so interesting. The Miners Union in Wales wants to show the film. And there's an interesting documentary also about comparing Wales and Appalachia, looking at how much Wales has been able to move forward in a respectful way. So yeah, you might want to check that out.
Speaking of in locations, you went a lot of places. How many places did you go?
We filmed in southwestern PA, so just south of Pittsburgh, in Pittsburgh too. That's where the Carnegie Museum of Natural History is, where they do that stratovator, that weird elevator thing. Eastern Kentucky, all of West Virginia, because it's the only state. I don't know if you guys know how Appalachia is geographically defined, but I think it's 13 states from Mississippi to New York, but West Virginia is the only state that's fully in Appalachia, and so that's partly because of the presence of coal and the economics and geography. But so we filmed all over West Virginia, and then a little bit of southwestern Virginia, and a little bit of East Tennessee, and then the casket maker, she's in western North Carolina near Asheville. So.
Wow. So how long did you take filming this?
Well, I live in the region, so it was pretty easy to pop around when things were happening. So we were able to make the film pretty quickly. We started filming in 2019, and given the fact that we didn't film for basically a year because of COVID, we finished in December 2022.
Oh. Yeah?
Thanks so much for the film. Such a beautiful, imaginative telling of the story. I loved it. You've already answered a lot of the questions, but I wonder if you could just talk a bit about the funeral scene.
Yeah.
It was so powerful, and also the song. I just
Yeah.
about how that came together.
Yeah. Yeah, I will repeat the question. Yeah. So the question's about the funeral scene at the end. Eventually, through making the film, you're always asking. You guys are filmmakers. You don't really know what the film you're making is, and as you're editing, you're figuring it out. And I realized this film is really about grieving, and it's about mourning, and that's really the first step to positive change. And it's not necessarily. I don't need to be prescriptive in what's next, but helping people get to what's next was the goal with the film. And so the burial rituals are something that's very real and present, and culturally they're not done, obviously, that way anymore. But death is very much a part of my family's traditions. My papa's a grave digger. My mom is, anyway, it's a big part of our family. And so the funeral felt like the step, the scene of people getting together. And it was a very scary idea to pitch to people because I didn't know how people would respond. I was pitching very widely, like miners to environmental advocates to everyone, very quietly too, because I didn't want this to get picked up in like local news and be spun as something that it wasn't. But basically just told people, like, we want to hold an event where we come together and we say goodbye. To this, whatever this entity is that's had so much power over our lives. And everybody just got it. It wasn't, I didn't have to say anything. And the people that didn't come, right? But we had 80 people there, and the eulogies they wrote. I mean, Heather, who gives that eulogy at the end, she wrote that 15 minutes before walking up the hill. And when we were listening to it, I was bawling because I had been writing this narration. And I was like, this is just finishing the story. Like, she's finishing the film right here and there, and it was unreal. But people brought poetry, they brought their kids read things, people brought their instruments, they played music. So the whole experience I'm actually editing into an exhibition piece. It's about an hour and a half long, but you'll just get a snippet over here. But it was just a really affirming, I'd never done anything like that with film, where you stage an event and then the things that happen are nonfiction, so we can't meddle in them once they start. But what was really powerful is I've spent a lot of my career trying to impact after the fact of making the film, and I just saw so many people, how impactful this actual event was to so many people in this moment, and I was like, wow, film doesn't always have to, sometimes it can model the life or the rituals that maybe we should already have, rather than forcing them upon people after the film's done. And so we're talking about holding it again this year and changing it up and not filming it, but it being a sort of celebration thing. Oh, so the song, so I collaborated with British folk singer Sam Lee. Are you familiar with Sam? Yeah. So I reached out to him because he's a big climate activist and has been working in the space of environmental song telling for a long time, and asked him if he could write an original ballad based on the film. And so that's what you were hearing in the credits. But then he wrote the call and response for Lady D, who's one of West Virginia's finest. She's a coal miner's daughter as well, the woman who sang it, to sing, and then the community did the response. So that was the only part that we gave to them to rehearse before we went up the hill. Everything else was, we didn't know what they were going to say.
I'm curious, what was the original film you set out to make, and what was your original intended audience, the division within West Virginia or the wider globe?
I don't know. I don't even know what the original film was. I think that most filmmakers, you just start, like you just are following an intuition that this is something that needs to be seen and documented. And I think my original intuition was just that these are dying, so I'm going to document them and not going to be in any hurry of figuring out what it is, but this is a living archive, essentially. A lot of these things, like so Fred, who does the classroom visits, he's passed away now. A lot of the events aren't happening anymore, so a lot of the things are done. And so that was kind of the original intention, was like, I grew up doing some of these things, they're clearly fading. What happens if we don't document them? And I think at first I thought the film could just be that, could be these observations, but people would literally like mock and laugh at the people when I would show fundraising reels, like, look how stupid that is. Like, why would anyone do that? Why would those women pledge their allegiance to coal? It's missing the context. It's missing the incredible force this industry has had over people's entire identity. And so that's when I realized, like, the film really needed a hand or a narration or something pulling it through to actually let you understand this undercurrent that's unspoken. It was just not, on the surface, it was too easy to gawk.
Speaking of which, I had also wondered about the narration that you wrote for that. How far along were you into production, and did that come completely in the post? Or was there a point during production that you started to write that?
Well, the writing, I had never written narration for a film and never narrated a film, so this was all very new to me. And the writing at first was just a lot of free writing, long writing, and then figuring out what parts were the most important were coming in the edit. But I was writing and recording up until picture lock, figuring out what needed to be said. And it was more about what didn't need to be said, because there was a lot you could say. I mean, there's a lot left out, right? And so that was the hardest part, was peeling it back to what was the most essential thing to say.
Because so much of what you say is so beautifully matched with the film. So I was like, did she write this before?
No, we found the whole film in the edit. My editor, Eva Radivojevich, is a master at that. All of her films are like poetic cinema with narration. So she knows how to somehow bring this full circle, and was really instrumental.
Any other questions out there? We probably have time for 2 more.
Your next project?
I don't know. I have no clue. This took a lot out of me personally, and so we'll figure it out. Yeah, I have no clue yet. I'm a slow thinker, so it'll take me a little while. I did want to mention one thing. I don't know if you noticed the breath art in the film, but there was we worked with a breath artist, Shodike, who I heard him perform at this festival in Knoxville where I live called Big Ears. And I had never heard of breath art. I didn't know that people use their voices to make the sounds of crickets and thunder and wind and waves and all these things. And he did it, and I just went right up to him after his performance. I was like, I don't know how, but I have to have this in the film, because it was so human. And so a lot of the sound effects you hear are human breath. Yeah, so it's not always obvious. Sometimes on a second watch, you can start to peel it apart. But it really, the human breath, like breath art, really comes to life in the funeral. Obviously, that's like the crescendo of it. But it's throughout. And that was, there's all kinds of metaphor there with breath and dance and life and living. So, yeah, just shout out to him, because he's incredible. And if you go on our Instagram, we have a couple videos of him performing. He's been able to come to a couple Q&As with us, and it's really fascinating to see it come from a human, the sounds that you heard.
Yeah, he's incredible. So are there any coal mines that are like been abandoned that are still having issues in the area? Because I know that it's quite a bit in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of abandoned mine issues, and a lot of mountaintop removal issues too, where permits have been abandoned and the land hasn't been properly reclaimed. And that one stream you see that's half orange and half, that's mine acid runoff from an abandoned strip mine. Yeah. I was filming there, and I asked my dad. My dad and I have this challenging relationship where he's a miner, and I'm always challenging him a little bit. And I'm like, so could I walk in that? Because the coal industry is like, it's fine, like there's nothing wrong with it. But clearly, like rocks aren't supposed to be that color. My dad's like, don't walk in that, So I consulted my brother in a lot of ways with the writing too, like what's the right way to say this? And so they were all really helpful and really open to the process. But
yeah, I know that there's a lot of groundwater from some old abandoned mines, and that's kind of the reason I asked it, and particularly in Pittsburgh, that's affecting. Any more questions?
Yeah, I love the film. It was amazing.
thank you.
At the end, you said like this region knows how to dream. What is like one story of something you've seen since all of this has happened that like inspired you about the future of the region?
Well, the film, I don't think I would have made this film if it wasn't already happening, if a transition wasn't already happening. And there's a lot of people working towards, and there's a great group called Coalfields Development that retrains miners to do all kinds of other labor that's pays well. And because a lot of the solutions have been like, let's have miners become lavender farmers. Well, they're making like $10 an hour. That's a beautiful thing, but a miner makes, anywhere from $75,000 to $100,000 a year. This is a high-paying job. And so Coalfields Development's been really intentional about rehiring and retraining. So they're incredible. They do a bunch of solar work. Local food movements out of Fayetteville and Thomas, West Virginia are really inspiring. I think just the overall push to clean up the area for tourism has been probably one of the better moves. We have our first national park in the state of West Virginia as of, I guess, a year and a half ago or so. The New River that you saw is no longer a national river, it's a national park. Of course, that comes with other complicated issues of having people flood in without the infrastructure to really, support it. But I'm hopeful. I just know that change is really slow. And we've just lost a lot of people. And so the region has the state has a higher death rate than birth rate. And so you can imagine the collapse of infrastructure that goes on. The house that I owned in Charleston, West Virginia before I moved, it just burnt to the ground last week because a small fire started that could have been put out, but they went to 3 fire hydrants in the neighborhood, and none of them had water. And so that's sort of the thing you're up against when you're trying to reinvent yourself, is when the basic infrastructure is not held up. How do you do that? So sometimes the odds feel really insurmountable, but there are very, very bright spots, I would say.
That's all the time that we have for Q&A, but if people want to continue talking, we'll be outside. And thank you so much, Elaine.
Thank you all. I appreciate it. Thank you.